preview as we take a look at the morning newspapers. First, though, our top stories here this evening. And Donald Trump has confirmed that the US is withdrawing from the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement despite international pressure not to leave. He says he'll negotiate re-entry, but other world leaders have said that's not possible. The Conservatives have continued to focus their general election campaign on the Brexit negotiations following a rise in the polls for Labour. And detectives investigating the Manchester bombing have released new images of the attacker Salman Abedi and asked anyone who saw him in Rusholme between the 18th and 22nd of May to come forward. Hello there, you're watching the press preview here on Sky News. Over the next half hour, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with the chief leader writer at The Observer and former advisor to Ed Miliband, Sonia Soda, along with the political director at the Taxpayers Alliance, Diya Chakravarti. Hello to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on the front pages, and the Financial Times reports on the Tories' drop in the polls as Theresa May turns to the promise of Brexit to woo voters. The I newspaper looks further at Jeremy Corbyn's vision for Brexit. The Telegraph claims that Labour's election campaign is being boosted by fake social media accounts sending out positive messages. The Times reports that Labour will try to form a minority government and rely on the SNP for votes in a potential hung parliament. The Sun takes aim at Jeremy Corbyn, claiming his spending would cost families an extra £3,500 a year. While the Mail reports on the Labour leader's plans to scrap a planned inheritance tax threshold. The Mirror has more on more than 10,000 people lying about being at the Manchester Arena bombing to score free tickets to the benefit concert. The Guardian leads on US President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw the US from the Paris climate deal. And the Metro has more on the mother of the Manchester bombing's youngest victim being made aware of her daughter's death as she regained consciousness. So let's chat through those front pages and some of the stories inside the papers with Sonia Soda and Diya Chakravarti. Welcome properly to both of you. And a number of general election campaign stories, as we could see there, making the front pages. You're delving inside to kick us off and taking a look at a double-page spread inside the Daily Mail. There's one half of it at least. Corbyn doesn't believe in Brexit, is how it reads. So what's their focus here?
So today's very much been a Brexit day for the election, as Theresa May had, I think, if you're counting, her fourth relaunch, and she made the day very much about Brexit. It's clearly her comfort zone, her comfort territory. We saw her earlier in her interview with Jeremy Paxman. It was her territory her comfort territory when she was saying no deal is a bad deal, and she's lobbed another attack on Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, saying that because he thinks any deal's better than no deal, that means that he'll take any EU deal that he can get, and he's not properly patriotic. Now, to me, this is a pile of rubbish, because the idea that no deal and we drop out of the EU with absolutely no transitional deal whatsoever, there'll be such a mess. All of the agreements, the regulations that we have, a lot of stuff to sort through. We've kind of got to get a deal. I think Jeremy Corbyn's absolutely right that any deal is better than no deal.
Well, they say that we would go to WTO rules, wouldn't they, if there was no deal in place?
But we don't default to that straight away. And WTO rules, sure, there's a system in place for tariffs, but they also rely, this is getting quite technical, but to know where you stand with WTO rules, every country has a quota. Now, our quota in the WTO system comes under the EU, and nobody knows what UK quotas would be if we drop out.
Sorry, Sonia. I'm a lot more optimistic than Sonia about this.
No.
I don't actually think that any deal is better than no deal. I do worry that, if we are too keen to get any deal at all, we might end up binding ourselves to all sorts of commitments that we don't necessarily want to be bound by. But what was interesting to me also about this story is that Jeremy Corbyn's really in a pickle with this one. He is the person who has campaigned for Brexit in a way, or has been a Brexit supporter all his political life, until he became the leader of the Labour Party, in which case, at which point his party didn't follow him in the sort of the pro-Brexit lead. He changed his mind, he became pro-Remain, and now he's having to hear from Theresa May, who actually did campaign for Remain, that he doesn't believe in Brexit. I just think Jeremy Corbyn is yet another person who called it wrong when it came to the referendum, and if he'd stuck to his guns, and if he'd supported Brexit, I think his poll ratings would have been much higher now as well.
Couldn't you say the same then to Theresa May as well? That she's campaigning saying Brexit is going to be good for Britain, and yet...
This is so
and that's what I was saying.
I'm just looking
that's what I was saying, why I was quite impressed with Theresa May, that when she was actually, when exactly that uncomfortable question was put to her by Jeremy Paxman, she actually wiggled out of it quite well. You know, so it's interesting.
It's a bit rich, though, isn't it? Because the essence of what Theresa May was saying today was, you know, Jeremy Corbyn doesn't believe in Brexit, therefore he can't deliver it. I do, therefore I can. But, you know, look at what she was saying. She was a Remainer just over a year ago. So, as you say, it's a bit ironic that the tables have turned.
And dear, we're getting a pattern, aren't we, in this final week that we're now in of campaigning, that Theresa May feels comfortable pushing this idea of leadership and Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn is going on the issue of cuts in public services.
Yeah.
Do you think they're going down the correct routes to glean the most number of voters? Is it working, those tactics?
I think
for
the
both
rumour
parties?
was that it was suggested to Theresa May that Brexit be put back on the menu, and so she's come back strong with Brexit, and you know, playing that card that she's the only person who's capable enough and mature enough to negotiate the best deal for us. But she seems to be very much leading from the behind. I mean, so there was that Amber Rudd stood in for her in that debate this morning. I think it was Justine Greening who was sent to not this morning, afternoon, to do Women's Hour instead of her. So it seems like she's very much taking a back seat and letting her team come out and speak on her behalf.
Yeah, I think the Conservatives have tactically fought a dreadful campaign. They tried to make it all about Theresa May and her leadership, when actually she's really flailed, and she doesn't seem to have that much of a personality, or seem to have had that on display in the last 4 weeks. And then they haven't really hammered Labour on their economic credibility as much as you might have expected. They're only sort of starting to do that a bit now, but they're really worried.
They have talked about a money tree quite a lot, haven't they?
They have, but it hasn't felt like it was the main line of attack. And I think that's because they were incredibly complacent at the start of this
completely
campaign.
agree with you, Sonia.
And I think they thought that
you.
May versus Corbyn would deliver them exactly what they needed, and it hasn't.
Well, the economy was a big theme in the last election, wasn't it? And the other theme was we've had echoes of this idea of a coalition chaos, which is one of Theresa May's phrases, isn't it? But this is a headline that could have been around in 2015 when Ed Miliband was leading the Labour Party, couldn't it? We will use SNP to give us power, says Labour.
Yeah, well, at that time it didn't. I mean, Sonia would know better than me, being close to that campaign. But even at that time, it didn't really. I mean, it didn't really work, did it?
I think it was quite effective, actually. Back
the Conservatives saying, vote Labour, get SNP.
Exactly. I think it was very effective back then. I do think the Conservatives will be very pleased with the Times front pages this week, because we had one already saying hung Parliament, which is going to, they think, probably scare lots of Conservative voters who might have stayed at home into going out and voting. And now you've got this one, which, as you say, Anna, echoes of 2015. The story, though, when you get to the heart of it, seems to be Labour's ruled out a coalition with the SNP. And when Emily Thornberry, when pushed, said, well, if we were the largest party in a hung parliament, we would form a minority government, and then, you know, we would ask parties like the SNP why they weren't supporting us if we put a budget forward. Now, she got herself into a very tricky situation by getting pushed on that. But to me, it just seems a bit like a non-story and scaremongering on the Conservatives' part, because obviously if you're the smallest party and you form a minority government, you're going to hope that some other parties back you, aren't you?
But interesting that the question's even being asked about a hung parliament and this kind of scenario, given where the polls were a few weeks ago.
Absolutely, you know, 20-point lead is what we started with, and I don't think anybody was taking Corbyn seriously at that time. But it is very much the case that the more people are seeing him, perhaps they're thinking he's not as, maybe he's slightly odd, but not the dangerous person that people thought he was, which is really interesting given that most of his policies are completely mad. So it's just, it is just an interesting situation that we've suddenly come from.
In your view?
In my view, obviously, which is what I'm here to give, obviously.
So, of course, absolutely.
So, yeah, which is an interesting turn of events, really. It's just, it's suddenly become interesting.
And let's turn to the front of the Daily Mail. Is this one of the policies that you were referring to? Corbyn's
Yes,
slide
absolutely.
death tax trap is what they're calling it.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the policies that is absolutely the opposite of mad. I think it's incredibly sensible in the Labour manifesto. If you look in the small print, what Labour's saying it's doing is it will reduce the inheritance tax threshold back to where it was before David Cameron started inching it upwards again, so down to £650,000. Now, it's really important that we tax inherited wealth, much of which comes through property that goes up in value over a number of years. People don't really do anything to earn that increase in value. It's because of what's going on in the broader economy. And when we look at the gap between the generations, how difficult it is for young people to get on the housing ladder, how much more debt young people are going into. And then if we also look at the demands on public services like the National Health Service, social care, we've got to fund these services from somewhere. And surely it is fair to tax a huge increase in housing wealth that the better off part of the baby boomer generation have experienced.
I'll obviously disagree with Sonia on this one, but inheritance tax is one of the most disliked taxes, and there's a good reason for it. It is, in my opinion, completely immoral. It is double taxation. Everything that's being taxed under inheritance tax.
But there's lots of double taxes.
Let's get no, but this,
you know, you pay VAT
also,
when you've already paid income tax.
True, absolutely, and those are things to discuss as well. But this one also hits families when at a really difficult time when they're grieving, and it also goes against the basic human instinct of wanting to leave something behind for the next generation.
Leave something behind. So you think that somebody with a house worth £900,000 shouldn't be making a contribution to the costs that they've generated in terms of the NHS or social care?
What I think, well, no, if you are going to argue that, then I think it's just crocodile tears on Jeremy Corbyn and his team's part to be decrying the social care policy that May's team,
there's a big difference between this and what Theresa May was putting forward. Because this taxes everybody who has who has a large house. Theresa May's policy, only people who have social care needs need to run down the value of their house. Now, I think it's much fairer to share it out amongst everyone.
Sonia, it's also only taxing people who can afford it. That's what you're forgetting. It's, yes, those who have that need.
I'm not sure people who've got a £250,000 house and no savings can afford it, actually. I think people who've got houses worth £900,000 have got far more of an obligation to pay.
I think it would have taken a lot more people right at the bottom out of the requirement to pay for social care if we'd gone for that social care policy.
OK, you can carry this on in the break.
I'm sure we will.
And we'll come back and talk about some different things in a short while. Don't go away. In the Financial Times today, more pain for BA passengers as the airline and insurers haggle over who's going to pay. That's coming up.